Hello, folks. Welcome back to Morning Shot. Surprise, surprise, surprise. It's not Byron, it's Chris Wyatt. I'm your host for today's Morning Shot interview, and my guest is none other than Byron from Morning Shot. Byron, how's it going?
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me on my own show. It's nice to be a guest on Morning Shot.
Yeah, it's about time. It's long overdue that we got you on the program. By the way, for folks, there's a lot of expropriation going on in South Africa. I've expropriated Morning Shot. It's now my property. We're broadcasting live from central Pennsylvania. No, but seriously, we thought it was time that people got to know a little bit about Byron. A lot of people, when he's been behind the scenes for a long time, then he came on camera with Ramon. Then Ramon went off and did something different. And when that happened, there were some people like, well, I don't think I like this Byron guy. And now look at the channel. It's twice as large as it once was, and it's breaking records and turning heads in South Africa. Byron, how you doing this, man? Don't you have a day job?
I do have a day job, actually. So believe it or not, Morning Shot isn't actually my full-time gig. Many individuals seem to think that you can become a multi-millionaire on YouTube. I don't know where they got this idea from. I'm sure they heard it somewhere in the great ether. But you and I both know, being internet individuals, the YouTube pays you, but it's not like groundbreaking. You might be able to use the money to fill up your petrol tank once a month or something, but outside of that, YouTube isn't really a thing in terms of revenue, right? So yes, I do actually have a number of day jobs. I'm an entrepreneur, so I do run various other companies during the day.
Well, you're funny you mention that because YouTube for me has been a big place to lose money. I've been spending tens of thousands of dollars just covering the news to bring objective news to people all over the world, my travel expenses, all the cost of building my studio, all that. And on a good month, YouTube revenue in the past has maybe paid my internet bill. That's about it. Certainly hasn't paid my petrol bill. But that aside, okay, you mentioned you run a lot of businesses. What sort of business are you in?
So I'm in finance. I'm actually a lawyer by trade. So
Oh,
a
that's
lot
the
of
end of this
people
conversation, folks. We're gonna have to end it right there. No lawyers. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So a lot of people obviously watch the channel and they don't actually know who I am. It's nice for you to remind some individuals of my history at the channel, if you will. Um, but the vast majority of my audience these days don't actually know anybody but myself. So I've been doing it for quite a while now on my own. And as you rightly said, the channel numbers have doubled in the last 6 months. So it's been very good. But by trade, I'm actually an attorney, what we call an attorney in South Africa, a lawyer for Americans. Um, but I'm a non-practicing lawyer in that I actually run a finance company. So I'm a lawyer by trade, but I run a finance company.
Well, I know a lot of
Oh,
Catholics are like that. They're not practicing, but they run finance companies.
it's pretty much the same kind of idea, right? So I run a finance company, and I have offices in 3 countries around the world. I have offices in the UK, South Africa, and Guernsey.
So the Channel Islands, that's interesting. I think most people aren't that familiar with the Channel Islands of Jersey and Guernsey. I, of course, am familiar with it because I was a dairy farmer. We named our cows after the island there. Have you ever been there to the Channel Islands?
Yeah, I mean, I have to go there every year for board meetings, so I know the area rather well. I say I know the area rather well. It's like an area the size of a football field. So to be honest, just rock up at the airport and you're familiar with the area. It's rather small.
It's a rather small territory. There was a Bergerac or something like that, a television show back in the 70s where a cop was on the Channel Islands. Pretty interesting. So you were a bit of a world traveler there. You've lived in multiple places like I have. I don't think you've lived as many places as I have, but you have lived a bit. You're very familiar with the UK and obviously South Africa. And it seems like South Africa is what you call home.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, I was born in South Africa, and I left South Africa when I was 17 to go to the United Kingdom. Now, that wasn't by choice. My parents basically immigrated there and they took me there, and I did my schooling in the UK. Means I finished my, what you would call, the British call their A levels, what South Africans, I suppose, would call their matric. I went from there and I did my master's, my doctorates. I did all of that in the UK. I had a very well established career in the UK, but outside of that, I also spent a year in Japan. And so I was a year in Japan, so I got to learn a bit of Japanese culture. I did that in my early 20s. And I have traveled all around Europe, and I have spent some time in the US. I used to be a martial artist for the majority of my 20s as my part-time thing. I ran a part-time school, and a lot of my, should we call them, events were in the US. So I've probably been back and forward from the US nearly 30, 40 times in my career. So I've spent time there. Never lived there, but I've spent time there.
So martial arts, do you earn some kind of belt where you're at a certain level?
Yeah, so I was a fifth dan. I was at a certain level, and then I competed. So I had a number of sparring matches around the world.
So what got you into that? I mean, it doesn't sound like you're another athletics. I mean, was it just something to keep you fit, or self-defense, or just somebody said, "Hey, do this one day," and next thing you know, you're doing martial arts?
I mean, I did martial arts as a kid, right? I mean, as a kid in South Africa, you end up joining most of the karate schools and that kind of thing. But I mean, I think that's pretty much every kid. Parents always go, oh, it'd be good for discipline and go do some martial arts. I mean, I was a child of the 80s, so the big thing at the time, 80s movies were all like Van Damme movies and cheesy kind of martial arts movies. And I suppose I grew up in that culture. So I grew up in the culture of let's call it martial arts. And obviously in the 90s when I was, going into my teenage years, and that wasn't that big an issue. But actually I was living in the UK, and I owned my own house, and I'd finished university, and I didn't really know what to do with my life. So at that point, I'd worked full-time to get myself through university. I was working full-time to pay a mortgage. And I suppose you get to that stage when I was looking at even my own personal health. I wasn't very healthy. And somebody suggested to me, well, why don't you go back to a gym? And I was like, I hate gyms. It's ironic because I like gyms now in my old age. Martial arts is a bit
Old
too,
age, my old age. Okay.
I'm not actually that young. I know this handsome face looks like it's 20, but I assure you, I'm double that age.
I wasn't going to say 20, but anyway.
But
so that's how you got into that. But so it's something you've kept up with, and you're still doing it, or no?
yeah. So in my 20s, then I was like, okay, I don't want to go to gym, so I ended up going to a martial arts school. And then one day I went to Europe. One of the Grand Masters were in Europe teaching, so I thought I'd go there for a weekend and see him. Then he invited me to go study with him, and I was like, yeah, that sounds swell. Thinking I'll never have to do that. Like, he'll never remember this conversation. Monday morning I go home and I got an email going, so when are you coming? And I was like, man, like, now I've got to either go do it or just like look like a tool. So I actually went and did it. So that's actually how I got into it. I put my foot in it, and then because I was a man of my word, I went and did it. But when I got back from doing that, I was teaching full time to kind of keep my skill level up. Then I was very young. I'd spent a year doing martial arts full time. Nobody wants to take you seriously because, frankly, you're a young pipsqueak. So you end up trying to prove a point, which is why you end up competing. But actually, I got medically retired when I hit like 33, 34. I got medically retired because I lost hearing in one of my ears, and there was an obstruction there, and they thought it might be a benign tumor. And the organizations don't allow you to basically get involved anymore. They're just like, no. Their biggest fear is that somebody gets hit in the side of the head and then they die on the mat, because then it's like you get all the allegations of it's cockfighting and whatever else. So a lot of people, like the minute they see you've got some kind of injury, they're like, done, retired. And so, yeah, they retired me at that age. Then I had to kind of like decide, do I keep up with it? Do I kind of like call it a day? And I got to say, my body told me to call it a day more than anything else. I could just start feeling I wasn't recovering as well anymore. In the winter, especially the winter in the UK, my knees ached like hell. And I was just like, you know what? Like, I'm getting old, and I don't want to get... I looked at a lot of the guys that I'd spent the last like 10 years with. Like, even some of my teachers, they were older than me, and they were like hunched over. Like, they were in their 60s and hunched over and unable to walk up a flight of stairs. And one guy couldn't do this. I know this seems like the stupidest thing in the world, but his hands were permanently like this from hitting stuff. And I was like, do this. And he's like, I can't. And I was like, nah, I'm all right. So I called it.
I'm done.
Yeah.
Nah, smart move. No, that's the problem with some of the, especially contact sports. Those injuries pile up, and once you get into early 30s, recovery time starts to get longer and longer. As you get old, you'll notice when you scrape your knee or shin or something like that, it doesn't heal in a couple days. It takes several weeks sometimes. But you've had interesting experience. So the Anglo-Saxon world in the UK, you've been to America, it's Anglo-Saxon culture. You've been to South Africa, which has Anglo-Saxon culture, but you've got that taste of flavor of Africa as well. But you've been to the Far East. Japan is a fascinating place. While it has a lot of similarities to the West because of its modern approach and business and that sort of thing, it is very Eastern. And has that had an influence in your life? Has it impacted you in some way? Because I didn't go to Japan until much later. I didn't get a chance to go until the Rugby World Cup in 2019. I wish I could have gone decades sooner, but it just wasn't in the cards. I spent a month there, and it was incredibly informative, and it was incredibly wonderful experience. I found the Japanese to be amazing. The only problem I found with Japan, aside from how expensive it is just too many damn people. It's so packed. Everywhere you go, you're crowded. But did your experience in the East, in the Far East, have an impact on your life? And if so, what sort of thing did it do? Change your outlook or your focus, or did it add to your repertoire of skills?
It's actually it's a very interesting and very deep question to ask. Most individuals won't see it like that. But the first thing actually I learned from Japan is actually to appreciate my own culture. I know that seems like really stupid, but actually it was one of the most important things to understand. Now, the reason for that is because it's like a lot of people, especially like in the modern worlds, like there's anime, there's manga, there's all these kind of like Japanese culture. Japanese culture is kind of cool. You know, kids want to go to ramen bowls and eat sushi, and you know, they want to do the things they see in an anime. And they think like martial arts is like Naruto and Bleach or whatever. And it's very interesting that what you start seeing in a lot of those individuals' homes is you start seeing these like statues of Buddha, and they put like Japanese drapes up, and then half the time like they don't know the difference between Japanese or Chinese, so they end up kind of having this mix of stuff. And then they're like, it looks Asian, it's the same. But my teacher once said to me, he said, you know, the samurai used to have over 90 different ways just to put their chopsticks on a table, because the samurai were forbidden to talk to the lower class because of the class distinction. So the way they would communicate to waiters was actually with their chopsticks. So they'd put their chopsticks in a certain way. If they wanted more rice, they put it in a certain way. If they wanted more drinks, they put it in a certain way. And so that way they didn't actually have to speak to the waiters. And so he said to me, he says, most Japanese people learn this from birth, but they don't even know that they learned it. It's just like, that's what they learned from their mum. And he's like, it's a cultural thing. And he's like, you're a Westerner. You'll never know this because you weren't raised Japanese. So as he said, you know, there's no point trying to be Japanese because you're not Japanese. And so, yes, you know, that was actually the first thing I learned, was actually a respect of, well, what did I get in my own culture? So, you know, it taught me to respect my own culture. Outside of that, I think that the one thing I learned quite a lot in Japan was actually what were the edge of my limits. And the Japanese have a concept, they call it yoshin. So it basically means like, how far can you go until you basically keel over in a heap and die? And the answer is a lot further than you think. And that's like, it's a very vague answer, but it's also a very truthful answer, because like you'll go for a run and you'll be like, I'm done. But if somebody were to put a gun next to your back and tell you they're going to shoot you, mate, you'll run another 5 miles. You won't know how you ran that extra 5 miles, but somehow you'll make it. And so I actually learned that quite a lot in Japan. The concept of like your edge of what you can do is actually not your edge. So it set me up very good in my career, because I never complained. Like if I had work to do and my work took me 16 hours a day, I just considered that my day. Most other people kind of just start to complain. They're like, oh, you know, I'm working too much or whatever. I learned a very strong work ethic from being in Japan. Very strong.
Well, indeed. In fact, the Japanese probably are only second to the Americans in their hours they put in for work. It's two cultures. They're very much focused on work. Although I think we're falling behind Japan. We've gotten quite lazy in America since COVID, but we'll see how it goes. So another thing about Japan. Now, I was only there for a month, so it's difficult to gauge this. But you hear stereotypes. I mean, of course, Japan is arguably one of the most racially homogenous countries in the world. Never mind the fact that the origins apparently are from Korea, but we won't argue with the Japanese on that. But the point is, it's racially homogenous, and there's lots of talk frequently about how Japan is xenophobic and they don't like foreigners, gaijin. I mean, Yokohama is basically an international town, but much of Japan sees very few outsiders, especially Westerners. Was that an issue? Did you experience that? Because my experience with the Japanese, they're incredibly friendly. I mean, but
Oh
one
yeah,
other thing about them before you get to that is that the Japanese, I'd always been led to believe, speak English. They don't speak
no,
English. I mean,
no, no, no.
maybe 5% of them speak some English, and maybe 3% can speak it well enough to hold a conversation. But they would try to talk to you, even though you don't speak Japanese. So, I mean, did you experience any sort of xenophobic air or atmosphere, or were they people just really cool to be around?
So it's actually very interesting. So the Japanese learn, they have to, compulsory, they learn English throughout high school. So they've all been through high school learning English, but they cannot speak a word of it. They just can't. Like, you would walk through so I was based around Shinjuku, and you'd walk through Shinjuku Station, and you would see a black guy from America, and you would just stop and you'd hug each other, literally hug each other, and you'd be like, "Oh my God, somebody speaks English!" Like, "Oh, I don't know who you are," but you'll be like two little kids skipping in a circle, being like,
Come here,
"Oh my
Bucks.
God,
Come here.
you know, you're like, "Yeah, give me a hug." Like, you just were so happy to see somebody that spoke your language, but that was bizarre, but. There's two words in Japan. Let's try use the example like if you were in France or Germany. Let's say you wanted directions to a place. So there's two words. There's hidari, there's migi. That means left and right. Let's say you were trying to go to a guy and you were like, I'm trying to go to Shinjuku Station. Hidari, migi, hidari. Like you'd get this as I'm asking you, do I go left? Do I go right? You know which way? Like they'd have enough vocabulary to kind of get what you were saying, and they could probably do what we do in English with like a little bit of pidgin English and break it down. But to a Japanese person, there's a very strange concept there. So if you understand something, wakarimasu, I understand. Wakarimasen, I don't understand. But you see, you can't say I don't understand. It basically is like the way the word works is basically you are shit at explaining it to me. And so it means like tell me again. It's not, you see, you can't not understand something in Japanese culture. Like everybody can understand everything. If I didn't understand it, you were just crap at explaining. So that culture, including the requirement almost to be constantly polite, means that if they're going to have this feeling where you might say that they're crap at something, they're not going to fight. They're just going to be like, "No, I'm not having this conversation." And so you'll go up to them and you'll be like, "Shinjuku Station, Migi, Hidari." The guy will look at you with a blank expression, turn his back and walk, and you'll just walk off, and you'll be like, "Okay, I suppose you're not going to help me then." And there's a lot of that goes on. So you get very used to people like ignoring you a lot. And that could be classed as, I suppose, xenophobic. But it's a cultural thing. You do notice people staring at you a lot. Because if you go stand on like a train, then you feel like Andre the Giant in a room full of midgets. You literally at least a foot and a half above every other person on the train. And they all looking at you like, "Oh, there's a giant in here." And yeah, that can feel a little bit like you're being singled out a little bit. But in terms of like in your face racism, not really. You know, apart from the cultural stuff and just looking at the guy that's really tall. I mean, I will say I had a Japanese girlfriend when I was in Japan, but the parents aren't going to allow you to marry her. Like the parents will be like, "You can go have fun, but like that's not your husband. Just let's just understand that you're not marrying this guy. We're not allowing that." And so in that perspective, yeah, that's not a thing. Marrying the gaijin, you
Not
can
going
have
to
fun
happen.
with the gaijin, but you're not marrying him.
Marriage is out of the question. You know, it's funny you mentioned that because I had a similar experience. It was a short time there, but yes, at my height, I definitely felt like Andre the Giant walking around there, or Victor Matfield. You know, I felt pretty tall. But beyond that, you know, you're right about the train tracks. I was in Yokohama after the Ireland-Scotland game, and I'm on the platform, and I'm the only gaijin stand there. And I look over left, I see like 4 or 5 guys with cameras and stuff, and we start chatting because we're the only gaijin there. You know, it turns out they're a BBC film crew from Northern Ireland. They wound up interviewing me about my experience in the Rugby World Cup because I'd been to 43 World Cup matches over a few World Cups, and they found it fascinating. But you're right, you sort of glom on to the people around you because, and even in Yokohama, which is really an international town, I mean, that's where the expats tend to conglomerate there in massive numbers. I still felt like an outsider, but I mean, I didn't feel unwanted, but I just, you know, it's obvious, you know, you don't, look, I've lived all over Africa and I've been the only white guy in towns, and it's not a thing. I'm nonplussed. I don't even see that. I'm just a guy there. But in Japan, I felt like, yeah, this is definitely not my culture. But it's a culture I thought it very exciting. I respected it. It was pretty cool and had a great time there. So let's take that and turn that into something else. So the Anglo-Saxon background, the background in Africa, the different cultural norms and how people perceive things, because all kinds of stuff is happening in South Africa right now with this expropriation, the Bella Bill, the government, solidarity after reform, come to America, all this other stuff going on. And there seems to me to be a lot of tone deafness on the part of certainly the government, and maybe even on the other side of the argument, there's some tone deafness about cultural perceptions. You know, kill the Boer. Oh, it's a heritage song. No, it's a violent song to kill people. So maybe there's some cultural perceptions here. How did your experience in the East and having an Anglo-Saxon background, and we'll get into more of your background later, how did that affect your ability to operate in South Africa? Because in South Africa, you're dealing with other ethnic groups, a dozen different languages. It's a fascinating experience. I mean, you are South African, but I'm sure your experience having really matured overseas and coming back maybe made you a little bit out of sync with culture. How did you get back into that, and has it worked for you?
Yeah, it's actually also a very interesting question. So when I actually came back to South Africa, I came back here to set up a branch. So I came here to set up a branch office, and I must say that there's certain things that you get used to in England. There's certain things I got used to in Japan. One of the things that you find in Japan is this idea that we call them the salary men. And a salary man is like, a salary man works 45 hours a week. He's considered part-time. True story. So it's kind of like, they almost require you to work 24/7. Even if you're not working, there's this like, you're deemed to be working if you're in the office. So you can be in the office sleeping at your desk and they'll be like, great. But if you're not in the office and you're doing something, they're like, oh, so-and-so's not serious about his job. He's like part-time. And so there's this thing where you almost expect people to want to work. In the UK, you have a slightly different experience where, you know, if you've worked in London, you'll know that London's highly competitive, and it's very competitive for the skill resource. So if you're like really skilled, so I'm an underwriter, there's not a lot of people that can do the type of jobs that I do in terms of underwriting. You know, for the audience who don't know, underwriting is basically taking risks, analyzing risks, putting figures on it, and then kind of determining the likelihood that it would actually turn out and happen. I like to call it legalized gambling, but that's just me. But
I'm sure it involves a lot of actuarial tables.
Yeah, and there is. And so you get really good at predicting certain stuff because that's your job. You also get really good at minimizing risks because that's your job. So in that area, there's not a lot of people that can do what I do, but the people that can do it are bloody good. Like, we all know each other. We all know who's really good. And I'm telling you right now, if I left my job tomorrow, the guy who replaced me would probably be better than me. Right? Like, the guys were just really good and really competitive. So just turning up wasn't enough. You had to be exceptional at your job to do well. And it wasn't just like, oh, okay, I just turned up and I got the job because there's so many of these jobs available. I mean, there is this impression that people think, go to London, you just get a job. Like, no, you're going to be fighting against very talented individuals. So those two things, when I came to South Africa, I was expecting to see two things. Number one is that people would be very skilled and very experienced and they would kind of compete for a job. That didn't happen. people almost have the attitude of, you're lucky if I pitch for work, because if you do, great, I'll pitch when I pitch. I'll be happy to pitch when I pitch. And the other part was I expected people basically to want to be at work because that's how you get paid. And I still say to today, I've got an HR manager and she says, people always told me they're really desperate for a job. And I say, no, people are really desperate for a paycheck.
Paycheck.
They're not desperate for a job. They don't actually want to do the work. They want the money, but they don't want the work. And in Japan, that was almost like sacrilege. And in the UK, it's like you have a lot of experienced people fighting for those skilled, highly skilled jobs. And in South Africa, you don't. You're lucky if you find one person that's skilled to do that job. And when you find him, you better hold on to him like you just found the Ark of the Covenant, because it's like you ain't getting another one.
No, they were like rare diamonds. Yeah. No, I think that's a good analysis. And not having worked in Japan, that's the impression I always had about the Japanese. I mean, some people work themselves to death. They die at their desk, literally. And with the UK, when I look at the UK, I don't look across the board because it's varying levels. But I think of London, I think of Canary Wharf and the financial sector. I mean, the most talented people in the world are at Canary Wharf. These people know how to move money. They know how to make money, and they make billions, and they trade tens of billions of dollars every day, runs through Canary Wharf. It's a major financial center. So you get the best talent there, and it's highly competitive. So I can understand where you're coming from. And also what you said about South Africa is exactly my expectation. When we talk about, foreign direct investment in South Africa, I always make the point, seriously? I mean, it's a lot of risk. With greater risk comes greater reward, but you're taking big risk in South Africa because you got to provide your own security, your own electricity, your own infrastructure. You've got a abysmal work ethic amongst many people in South Africa. It's up and down. And a lot of people presume that, that bad work ethic is only amongst black South Africans. No. It extends across all ethnicities. You got a lot of lazy white people too, don't you?
Yeah, unfortunately, and it's something that I say to a lot of individuals, and that's like, I'm not one of those guys who believes in the whole white privilege, blah, 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 blah. But sometimes I see it, right? I see it actually in the people that I employ. They almost like, well, I'm white, I should get a job. And you're like, no, dude, you still need to be able to do the job. And then there's this like mentality of, yeah, but you must give me a pay rise every 3 months. And you're like, dude, if I keep giving you a pay rise every 3 months, you're soon going to be on a salary of like 2 million a year. And then you'll ask the question, like, what did you do for this? And they're like, well, I came to work. You're like, you honestly seriously think that you're worth a pay rise every 3 months because you pitch for work? Like, are you delusional? Like, you're not even very good at your job. You just pitched for work. You're a distinctly average employee. And they're like, yeah, but I want a pay rise. And I've got to say, I don't get that mentality from a lot of the black staff I have. Like, the black guys in my company, they don't do that. It's almost like they know, don't come and ask me for something because you're not going to get it. But the white guys, they're like, I deserve that. So that whole like white privilege thing, like I say, I don't actually believe in it, but I have seen it, to be honest.
Well, let's take that a step further. I have a recommendation for you, direct from Elon Musk. Ask your workers 5 things they've done this week.
Yeah, I saw that. But again, that's actually then one of the differences between the US and say South Africa is that Elon's like, I can fire you all with an email. Good luck trying that in South Africa. You'll have your company burnt down, bud.
You need to come to Pennsylvania. It's an at-will employment state. You can fire somebody for looking at you sideways. It's fantastic.
You know what I mean?
I'm not trying to fire people, but I'm not trying to fire people. But the bottom line is that if you don't perform, if you don't add to the bottom line, then what's the point of having you? I mean, big corporations, IBM would always have a goal. Because they were mostly salesmen back in the day. If you didn't meet sales targets, then what's the point of having you? Because it's revenue per employee. That's what matters. You got to make money.
Yeah, but in South Africa, you can go through 20 disciplinary hearings, steal from the company, and set the cafeteria on fire, and then I can fire you, and they'll still call it unfair. So you're like,
and make you pay a settlement for firing them unfairly,
right? After they set half the building on fire, like the labor legislation in South Africa is very difficult to navigate.
All right, before we turn attention to your background in your genealogy and your history, I want to just ask a question that may be of interest to a lot of people. What fuels you? I mean, look, MorningShot could have died. Ramon left. He went to work in the government, and MorningShot could have died. You and I talked at that time, and I think that, I don't think I'm exposing a big secret here, but people don't know this, but you and I talking, you said, "Hey, what do you think?" And I said, "Well, keep it up, man. I think it'll be a great program, and you can make it grow." And we chatted quite a bit then, and you stuck with it, and the program has grown immensely. I think it's amazing. Only second to my program, so but now that I've expropriated this program, this is also number one. But no, but seriously, what drives you to do this? I mean, like me, you're pretty busy. I mean, it takes a lot of energy to do this, to stay on top of these things. What's motivating you to put out Morning Shot every day?
Yeah, so I mean, I actually got involved with MorningShot very early on, but I actually never wanted to be behind behind the camera. Who knew? But I'd never been a guy that was like in front of the camera. So like Ramon wanted to be the camera guy because that's Ramon. Ramon likes the camera. Ramon likes to love himself. So and the camera's a way for him to like love himself, if that makes sense.
Well, let's get through the editing room, the cutting floor in the editing room.
No, this is definitely getting through. So it's like but it's true. Like Ramon loves to love himself. So the channel got to around 25,000 subs, and Ramon had a kid, and he was like, "This is too much hassle." I was helping him with some of the research and the script writing, because in those days we actually, we used to script the videos, and like we've tried everything. Like we've tried let's cut it up professionally with a proper professional editor and script it and research it, and then we've tried like just wing it and then go out in the street with the camera. Like we've tried all the things to see kind of what works. We've had a lot of time to do this over like 5 years. So Ramon had a kid, and he was like, this is too much work now. So the channel went into a month of hiatus when we sat there and we discussed, like, how do we want to do these things? And so Ramon wanted to try some mini documentaries on some subjects. We did a couple of those. We got an editor. We did them. They didn't do very well. And then he was like, "I'm done with Morning Shots." And I think we were at like 25,000 subs. And he's like, "I'm done. There's too much work." And I said to Ramon, "Well, yeah, but we both put in a lot of time and effort. But I don't really want to see it go to pop. So what will help you out?" And he's like, "Well, I'm tired of having to edit all the I'm tired." He didn't actually edit the videos at that point. So he's like, "I'm tired of having to script the video and record it. It takes too much time out of my day." And that was all he had to do. He just had to script and record it. And then half the scripting was done by me anyway.
Let me interrupt you for a second here, too. This is back when it was just a 10-minute snippet every day at 7 a.m.,
Yeah.
correct? Okay,
That's
I just want to make sure I'm tracking when this was.
Yeah, this was all way back when, like 2021. Now, during COVID, he used to do a live stream every day because he was bored. So between 5 and 6, he did a live stream where he just talked rubbish to the audience. Those have all been removed from the channel now, by the way, because they could potentially have comments that could get our channel deleted 5 times over. So they're all gone. They're in the dustbin of history. But we were doing 10-minute Morning Shot videos of the news, the daily dose of news analysis. And, we were sharing the responsibility of researching and writing stuff. And all he had to do was like read the script and go on camera, and that was it. And there were numerous times where even him having to read the script was like beyond the pale. Like you'd give him a script and he wouldn't stick to it, and you'd land up with this really shitty video of something that he tried to fly on the side that just like that's not what the script says. But again, that's Ramon. So he was like, he doesn't want to do that anymore. So I said, okay, well, how about I'll sit on the one panel, we'll co-host it, we'll just talk rubbish with each other, we'll record it and put it out, and that'll be the day's video. And so that's what we did. And we did that for 6 months, and the view count went down to like 1,000 to 2,000 views a video. Like it was really bad. Like people were like, "Oh, this is such a change in formula, and we hate it, and it's crap, and it's rubbish." And it's like, okay, well, we just stuck with it. And like I still said to Ramon, "Do you want to go back to how it was?" And he's like, "I'm not doing that. It's too much work." It's like, okay, so we stuck with it. And then we got lucky with a couple of videos. It grew the audience counts. And then from there, it actually became easier. Like him and I got into a groove of talking to each other. We could almost read one article and like create a whole video out of it. We obviously had sources behind it as well, people who would tell us information, and then we'd make a video out of it and so forth. And we managed to get the view count, the subscriber count up to like 50, 60,000 subs. And then the same thing happens. He called me up one day and said, "Well, John's offered me a job." I was like, okay, What's that mean? He's like, well, I can't do morning shot. I was like, why couldn't you do morning shot? He's like, well, I'm not going to do two jobs. And, John's worried I might say something on camera and it's going to come back and bite him in the ass in the agricultural ministry. And there's a large amount of like irony in that, right? Especially considering what happened.
There is, but also it probably would have happened.
Yeah, I mean, it happened anyway. Like, who cared? Who cared what he had said on live stream going forward? He should be worried about what he said on live stream going backwards. So, and I still, I spoke to him about it at the time, and I was like, the guys are going to come for you, right? And he's like, John says he'll back me. And I'm like, good luck with that one, bud. Like, I've worked in politics. I know how this works. If they see you as a liability, they're cutting you. And he's like, nah, John's got me. It's like, John didn't have him. So I still said to him, okay, well, do you want to? Would you ever want to come back? And he's like, no, I'm not doing that anymore. It takes too much time out the day. It's too much hassle. So at that point, I had to kind of sit there and go, well, so now what? Okay, so he's gone forever because he doesn't want to do it anymore. It's too much hassle. What do I do? Do I reduce it to like 2 videos a week, 3 videos a week? Do I just can it? And so I stayed on. Now, I stayed on to do it personally because I was loyal to the audience. Like, the audience had been there and they were watching us and they've been fairly loyal to the show. So I was like, okay, I'll just do the videos on my own then. And then my first video I did on my own got 160,000 views. And that was my first video. Then I did another video about the GNU making fun of Julius, and that got 280,000 views. And then I got like loads of swearing from Ramon, like, fucking ridiculous. What's going on? It's like, so I was like, sorry, Ramon, I made Morning Shot great again. And he didn't find it funny. So, but the audience actually took to me very well. And now we're at as of this morning, time of recording, we're on 122,000 subs. So I've actually doubled the numbers in X amount of time. And every video roughly does around 100,000 views. So here's proper gel. But I asked him many times, like, would you want to come back? And he's like, no, too much work. And that, unfortunately, is a symptom of Ramon. Like, when there's a lot of work, you don't want to do it. Like, that's not me saying something that's not true. It's something I tell him myself. He knows that. If, like, it's a lot of work, he's like, nah, it's too much work for the hassle. So it's like, okay. And you know what, Chris, like, you and I both do this, and it is a lot of work. And it is a lot of hassle. And sometimes it feels like more work and hassle than it's worth. So, like, he's got a point sometimes. Like, he's not always wrong. But there's a degree of irony. So what keeps me doing it? It's a very good question. I suppose, the whole point of Morning Shot, even at the start, was to keep people educated on what was happening in South Africa so they weren't caught off guard by the news. But I don't mean off guard in that they just didn't know. Like, most people are pretty well connected to the news, but for all the wrong reasons. And so there was like this lady one day in my office, and she says, did you hear about that big shootout that happened in downtown Sandton? And I was like, what happened? And she's like, well, there's this guy and he had a baby in his car, and they went and they shot, there were bullets flying around and hit one of the babies. And I was like, wow, where'd you hear that? She's like, Facebook. And I was like, so I went on Google and I typed it in, and I was like, the shooting event did happen in Phoenix. And I was like, oh,
that's in
Phoenix,
KZN.
And I'm like, Phoenix, that makes sense. But that's like in KZN. And so there's a lot of this that goes on in the country. Like, people just talk rubbish. Like, we just had a thing here in Nelson Mandela Bay. This lady got kidnapped, and it was on all the news. So they went into the school. 3 guys went into the school, kidnapped this girl. And the first thing, like, everybody's like, oh, kidnapping. And the first thing that went on my head is like, oh, her husband probably owes money and his life insurance money. Because that's the reality of what actually goes on quite a lot. So the whole point is, when I say the news not to catch you off guard, I actually mean like the bullshit news. Because there's lots of bullshit news out there, but people don't really know what's actually happening. So the whole point of Morning Shot was to say, well, actually, this is what's actually happening. And the idea behind that was so that people kind of had a good understanding of what was going on, but at the same time to also understand that, like, South Africa almost wasn't as unique as they think it is. And like, there's a lot of people that are like, I heard that story about the shooting in Sandton, so I must leave the country. And you're like, but the story in Sandton's bullshit. It was like in Durban. And so you're wanting to run away from a country based on bullshit. Like, you don't actually need to immigrate. The country is actually not as bad as you think. A good example is the expropriation stuff going on at the moment. You know, like everybody's like, they're expropriating everything. It's like, fuck off. No, they're not. You know, yes, there was a land grab. Yes, I covered that story, Ian Cameron's story. He sent me all the info. I made a video on it. Got around 160,000 views on that video. It's a good video. I think it was a good video. But, you know, at the end of the day, you could say potentially maybe it's an isolated event. Maybe it's going to spread. Who knows? But you know whose property they didn't just land grab on? Mr. Smith, 1 Santon Drive. Because they don't care about those properties. But that's not what everybody talks about.
Actually, 1 Santon Drive is our property. So good luck with that. That's where the consulate's at.
See, you know. But you get
your
what
point.
I'm saying.
I get your point. Yeah. Look, I mean, well, the problem is that this can happen very fast and unfold. But there are a lot of Cassandras out there. I agree with you. Look, we're short on time, Byron, unfortunately. But I did want to unpack something. We can do it very quickly here. And that is your background. I mean, I'm a genealogist. I do family history. I've got 26,000 people in family history. I can trace it back to the year about 564 on the island of Öland off the east coast of Sweden, which is quite a ways. Now, your background is interesting, and from a couple standpoints. Number one, the mix of peoples from Europe, and number two, the history of expropriation. So I understand you've got Scottish Highlands background. Of course, the history there is the land dispossession that took place. A lot of Scots fled to America and had a major impact there. Some went to South Africa. And then also you have ancestry from Old Preußen, from Prussia, Ashkenazi Jew. And so that's interesting. And the folks there often suffered through pogroms and dispossession and fled there in many cases. So your background, your history, if I understand it correctly, is that of having been people who had everything taken from them illegitimately, and they seek a better life elsewhere, whether it was in the United States or in your case, your family, South Africa. And now this whole topic of expropriation, which is not, I keep telling people, it's not about land. That's a red herring. It's not about land. I keep saying that, I've said from the very beginning, this is a law that no government should have the power to have because it can be abused to silence political critics. If you speak against the government of the day, whether it's the ANC, the DA, the PA, whoever the government of the day is, at some point in the future, if you speak against them and they don't like it, they'll just take your property, and they can do it legally, and then you're destitute. So I think the expropriation is an apropos thing, talking about your family history. Did I get it correct? Is that sort of the history of your family going back in time?
Yeah, that is correct. So actually, on my father's side comes from the Scottish Highlands. And for those of you who know your history, there was this thing called the Jacobite Revolution, where they basically tried to restore the Scottish monarch. And it didn't go very well, and it landed up with a large amount of nobility in a place called Culloden, which is north of the Highlands. So even today, there's Culloden is a battleground. You can go visit it. It's outside of Inverness.
I do have to interrupt you for just a second. You did say the Jacobite Revolution, correct? Yeah, that's clearly a Scots point of view. From the Englishman's point of view, it's a Jacobite revolt.
Yeah, well, I'm a historically a Scot, so like, yeah, revolution. Damn bloody English, burn you lots of steak. Anyway, so the whole point was obviously when that happened, they had this big massive barney in Culloden, which is just outside of Inverness, and a lot of the lords, the noblemen, anybody who was involved in it basically had their lands dispossessed because the English wanted to basically make sure it was never going to happen again. And in the past, like, land ownership or land title was basically the root of the Scottish identity. So if you really wanted to destroy the Scottish identity, just take away their land. Because Scots are incredibly tied to their land, very much like the Boer, I suppose. But
so that sounds very familiar.
yeah, so a lot of Scots lost their land and basically ended up becoming landless. But at the same time, the monarch didn't want them to stay there. So the monarch actually proactively encouraged them to leave. They were like, you guys were a problem, you're now landless. They kind of knew that at some point they're probably going to rise up and fight for their land because they're going to want it back. And they're like, you know what? send them to the front lines. And that at that point, there were two front lines to send them to. It was like send them to America or send them to South Africa, because those were the two areas that they were fighting wars in. So some people landed up in America, some landed up in South Africa. I happen to have the family from 17 whatever that came here from Scotland, and they came to South Africa. And I've got the genealogy and the tree, and many of them like landed up in Transvaal, many of them landed up in the Karoo, many of them landed up in Durban. And it's actually very interesting to see how they moved around the country, because they weren't all in one place, and they've moved a lot. So that's on my dad's side. On my mom's side, my family come from Prussia. Now, for most people who don't understand, there's the Ashkenaz community in that area was always very insular. And so they say, this is what the genealogists claim, they say that Ashkenaz can usually trace themselves from 300 people who fled Palestine, Israel. They fled that region when the Second Temple was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans, and the Romans chucked them out. The Romans basically said around 94 AD, you leave. Because they kept having revolts and people were trying to recapture the land. And part of that was because when the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, the Romans actually built a temple on top of the original temple mount, but it was to their god, like Apollo or something. And they found it as being sacrilegious, and they were like, you can't do that, that's God's place. So they kept having wars with the Romans, and eventually got to a point where the Romans were like, Futsak, leave. And they had to wander into Europe. And they say the Ashkenaz community can trace themselves through to these 300 people that left. And the community was always very insular, because many of the countries they were entered into didn't want them to intermix. So they were always a very isolated community. So if you find somebody that has Ashkenaz DNA, it's like the easiest thing in the world to find, because the result of of intermixing with other people, like diluting down the DNA, was like non-existent. You can still, if you go to some parts of like ancestry, you could almost find somebody that has an Ashkenaz DNA of like nearly 80%, which is insane to think for 2,000 years that DNA bloodline is has had zero dilution. It's insane. But anyway, so because those communities were very insular in those regions, for the longest time, and this was actually something that started with a Roman decree. So when they went on their little wonders, what they call the diaspora, when they went into the diaspora, the Romans didn't want them owning land, because they didn't want there to almost be this like comeuppance for what they did in Israel. So they kind of banned them from actually being involved in anything. And then it was always very easy to identify who they were, because they were such a close-knit community. So what ended up happening is that they were allowed to do things or go into professions that the Romans didn't like them being involved in. And so when the Christians became the largest religion in Europe, and the Muslims still have this today, is you can't earn interest on money lent. It's prohibited. You're not meant to do that. And it could get you a one-way ticket to hell. And from their perspective, it was like, well, the Jews are going to hell anyway, so let the Jews do it. So it's like the Jews all ended up as the money lenders, the grand irony, right? And there were loads of stories about Jesus talking about, the money lenders and how evil they were and whatever. And they're like, oh, that's the Jews. Just let them be the money lender. And it became really fashionable, because if a king or a government owed a lot of money to a Jew and they didn't want to pay it, they were just like, these bloody Jews, expel them. And then it's like you get to wipe your debt off. You're just like, hey, ledger's clean, expropriate their property, whatever they had, and the ledger's clean. And they're like, bloody dirty Jews, get rid of them. So that happened a lot. Now, for the audience who don't know, a region that tended to happen quite a lot in was in Prussia, because Prussia even today doesn't really exist. It's a mix between Germany and Poland. And so you'll recall that in World War II, the Germans invaded Poland because they wanted to reclaim this territory that they claimed with Poland. Poland was like, no, actually, it's our territory. So Prussia's gone. It's gone to the ash heap of history. It's a disputed territory where we're constantly as like in German hands and then Polish hands, and then it was a kingdom of their own, and then it went to Russia, and it's disputed territory. But it's no longer exists in modern times. But what does exist is the memory of Prussia. And the memory of Prussia was the Jews were quite often welcome and then they weren't. And then they were welcome and then they weren't. They were welcome and they weren't. And whenever anybody had to pay back a debt, they weren't welcome. But when they wanted more money, they were welcome. And so if you're from that livestock or that stock, you've seen your shit get stolen more than once. Like more than once. So yes, I happen to have the DNA of two people that were used to getting their shit stolen. So, yeah.
Which is ironic. It's an ironic situation where that discussion is going on today in South Africa about expropriation without compensation. Yeah, it's look. You mentioned the tight DNA. For years, for the longest time, people claimed the Jewish community that anyone that was named Cohen was directly related. You know, I mean, there are a lot of Joneses, and you know, are Joneses all related? Well, not so much, but the Cohens. And in fact, DNA studies have shown that the Cohens are all originally from one small group, and they are all tied together. It's fascinating. DNA's really proved a lot of oral history that people have talked about for centuries.
Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting looking at it even in a modern context. And so it's something that I do say to a lot of people, and they're like, oh, why don't you just leave the country? And it's like, I come from two people that have been dispossessed of their land. And you telling me that I must be dispossessed for a third time and go to another country, and what? I must just be faithful that it won't happen again? Like, are you stupid? Like, at some point in time, when you see history continually repeats itself, you understand that I can be dispossessed of my land for a third time, go to Australia, and maybe the Aborigines kick off all the immigrants there because they want their land back. And that's a genuine movement that's going on right now in Australia, as an example. So, and you've got the same problems in America with some of the Native Americans. Like, it's a global issue to a degree. Like, so dispossession kind of, it's just the nature of
human history.
How, it's the nature of my history. So it's like, it's one of the reasons I refuse to leave South Africa. I refuse to be dispossessed for a third time.
Well, Byron, here on Morning Shot, I always like to give my guests the final word. So I think it's time to wrap up. And I want to thank you for coming on Morning Shot today. It's a pleasure to have you finally get you on the program. I know you're a bit of a shrinking violet, but I'll give you the floor now for some final thoughts, and then I'll wrap it up for our guest here on Morning Shot.
Well, thanks so much for having me on my own show. It's nice to be a guest and be asked about who I am on my show. But it was a pleasure to be here with you today, Chris. I really do appreciate it. And for everybody who's helped make Morning Shot great again, I really do appreciate everybody who supports the channel and supports the work I do. It's not always easy, and it's not always a project that you're thanked for doing, if you know what I mean. Like, sometimes it's a very thankless task, but it's still great to see that people are still love their country enough to want to follow what's happening in it. So I appreciate everybody who watches the channel religiously.
Well, Byron, thanks a lot. Folks, if you think you're watching Bizarro World with Superman, no, that's not what's happened today. Byron was kind enough to ask me to come on the Morning Shot and interview him. But I do have a tip for you all. You need industrial strength cybersecurity. Otherwise, Chris Wyatt will invade and expropriate your program, which I did here today on Morning Shot. So thanks a lot, Byron. Have a good day, and we'll chat again.
I thought you were going to advertise a service there for a second. Yes.
Cheers.
Take it easy. Cheers.